I advanced in several playoff and best ball tournaments because of massive weeks from wide receivers, and that's why it's so important to rank these guys heading into week 16. So make sure to go down there and drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel to show your support, because I'm doing everything I can to get us ready for week 2 of the fantasy playoffs. So getting into our first tier right here, I still think the same tier applies to these three guys. Jamar Chase, Nico Collins, Puka Nacua all belong in tier 1 in my opinion. Jamar Chase versus the Cleveland Browns just makes tons of sense, right? The guy obviously has the combo of the highest floor and the highest ceiling. Jamar Chase can easily go off for 40 points against anybody. I think he could easily do it against the Cleveland Browns here, and I just don't think there's really a need to discuss it even further. With Nico Collins here at the Kansas City Chiefs, obviously the matchup is either hit or miss. Nico Collins and CJ Stroud, definitely some issues more so with CJ Stroud, but Nico Collins continues to be the number one, and really at this point, the only effective receiver in this Houston Texans room. Like, everybody else is so ineffective right now. So Nico Collins, just out of necessity and out of upside that he already has, still belongs to number 2 to me, with Puka being right on his tail at number 3. I mean, even in a rainy game on Thursday night to kick off the fantasy football playoffs, I still think that Puka Nacua looked awesome. Puka Nacua was the lone bright spot, realistically, on either side of the ball. So Puka Nacua at the New York Jets, we'll see what weather looks like this week, but either way, this guy has been balling absolutely hard ever since he's returned from injury, and he belongs in tier 1. Dropping down to our next tier, I've got Justin Jefferson at number 4 and Terry McLaurin at number 5. So with Justin Jefferson at the Seattle Seahawks, he has a really good game against the Chicago Bears on Monday night. And I think it was just kind of a good illustration of what Justin Jefferson has largely been for the majority of the year. You know, watching that game against the Chicago Bears, there were several times where Darnold missed his connection to Justin Jefferson, and Justin Jefferson actually dropped a touchdown pass and just got a little short on a second touchdown pass. Thank you for being short, by the way, because that put me in the playoffs in the next round of a Best Ball Mania tournament. Justin Jefferson, either way, is a very high upside player, obviously. And against the Seattle Seahawks, who just got ripped apart by Romeo Doubs, he'll have a lot of success. Terry McLaurin, one of my big guys this week. Had him in several playoff leagues and redraft, and had him in several best ball tournaments that he was absolutely fantastic in. And it just continues to shock me why people don't consider this guy a must start. This is a must-start player, guys. He is so efficient, basically catching 80 to 90% of his balls on a weekly basis. Versus Philadelphia, the matchup's not great. You know what? I don't really care. Terry McLaurin goes into your lineup. Amon-Ra St. Brown at 6 and Mike Evans at 7. Listen, Amon-Ra St. Brown has the massive blow-up. We've all been waiting for this, and I actually benefited from it as well. Amon-Ra St. Brown against Chicago, this was, several weeks ago considered a very tough matchup. At this point, it shouldn't be looked at it as that, because Amon-Ra St. Brown is taking on a defense that I think is just ready to go to Cancun. I mean, I think they're honestly just ready. Like, they're going to the Bahamas, to Cancun, to Dubai, like, wherever they're going, they're ready to say 1, 2, 3, Cancun. Like, it's over for the Chicago Bears. They don't care. And Amon-Ra St. Brown obviously doesn't have as safe of a floor as he used to. That's why I've got him down here at tier 2. And Mike Evans just shows me why I should never rank him very much lower than this. Mike Evans goes off against the Los Angeles Chargers, a much tougher matchup than what he's getting this week against the Dallas Cowboys. So he's obviously got a great path to major fantasy upside this week. It still remains he has a lower-ish floor, sort of similar to Amon-Ra St. Brown, but obviously the upside there is absolutely enormous when Baker Mayfield is playing really well, as he did against the Los Angeles Chargers. Dropping down to our next tier, I've got CeeDee Lamb at number 8 and A.J. Brown at number 9. So obviously both these guys have really good games on Sunday in Week 15. CeeDee Lamb does fantastic against the Panthers, and he's got another great matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. A.J. Brown at Washington gets a fantastic matchup after ripping apart the Steelers, and we saw it 2 for 2 in Week 15. Debo complains in Week 14, gets the ball, does nothing with it, was a disgrace. A.J. Brown complains a bunch. He's obviously a very, very high-end player still at this point of his career. So with A.J. Brown, if they feed him again this week, he's easily going to be a top 5 wide receiver. I just want to hedge my bet against it a little bit because I don't know how effective it's going to be against the Washington Commanders for a second straight week. It's Davante Adams at number 10 and Jerry Jeudy at number 11 here. With Davante Adams versus the Los Angeles Rams, I don't really care what matchup looks like. I said this for weeks now. And it really brings me back to when I called Davante Adams a great buy low trade target before he was even playing with the New York Jets. Even when they got Davante Adams, the Jets, I said he was going to be their number one. It took a little bit. Here we are, though. The guy has a super safe floor because of targets that he's getting on a weekly basis. He also has a ceiling like we just got in Week 15. Enormous ceiling because him and Aaron Rodgers are just on the same page from years of chemistry. Davante Adams at this point is so must start. It's not even funny. You wouldn't even believe it. And Jerry Jeudy here at 11 at the Cincinnati Bengals. Matchup is obviously fantastic. And even in a matchup that wasn't particularly great and in a weather game that wasn't particularly great either, Jerry Jeudy still came through for a solid fantasy production game. Now, do I think that Jerry Jeudy is going to hit the upside like that every single week? Well, I'll tell you this. A lot of it depends on if Jameis Winston's playing this week. Because I've already read reports that Kevin Stefanski declined to comment on who would be the starting quarterback this week. That's a problem for Jerry Jeudy. 100%. If it is not Jameis Winston, this is going to be a massive issue. So we're going to have to keep tabs on this one throughout the week. Because if it's Jameis, I like him here at 11. But if it's not Jameis, I've got to have Jerry Jeudy much lower ranked this week. I'll tell you one thing you don't have to worry about, though, is Baker Mayfield hitting more than 0.5 total yards against the Dallas Cowboys on Sunday night. That is absolutely happening here, and it's your chance to win free money, basically, on Underdog. So if you want to take advantage of this sweat-free pick and hit the higher on this Baker Mayfield projection, go down in the comments and grab the link that's there and use code FFN to sign up for Underdog. When you use code FFN to hit the higher on the sweat-free pick for Baker, they will match your first deposit 50% up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Now, dropping out to our next tier, I've got Jackson Smith-Njigba at 12 and T. Higgins at 13. So with JSN, he's obviously become the number one guy in Seattle, regardless of who the matchup is against. He gets Minnesota this week, who has been historically pretty good against wide receivers as far as wide receivers doing well against them in fantasy football. It's a pretty good matchup for a wide receiver. Now, obviously, the question's sort of similar to Jerry Jeudy, which is, I don't know who's going to be his quarterback this week. Geno Smith went down and did not return in Sunday Night Football, and initial tests on his knee are relatively positive, but I don't know what his status is heading into this week. So if it's not Geno and if it's Howell, good luck to JSN. He'll still get his work just through targets like near the line of scrimmage, but he won't have many downfield targets like he's been getting from Geno Smith. So it definitely, again, depends on who his quarterback is. And T. Higgins, this is a great example of why you don't bench a player like T. Higgins. T. Higgins, the year he's had this year, after one bad game, people were ready to write him off. And it's like, guys, T. Higgins is going in your lineup. Like 100% of the time, T. Higgins goes in your lineup. Versus Cleveland this week, matchup is great. And last week, he did his work again. Got in the end zone on a big play. T. Higgins is ultra important to this offense. One bad game does not shape how this guy has done for the majority of the year. He's been awesome. You just got to keep riding the wave with him. Jordan Addison at 14 and Jauan Jennings 15. Let me tell you this. Jordan Addison's floor, I'm ready to really commit to him. Like, Jordan Addison obviously didn't come up with a massive play on Monday Night Football, did pretty pedestrian work, but the reality is that his target share has become so stabilized and really set in stone over the last month and a half. Jordan Addison has become a massive contributor to this offense, and even though, again, like he did not have the massive stat line, he only had 10 less yards than Justin Jefferson, and he just didn't get the touchdown. This guy realistically can go off any week. He's playing Seattle this week, who got ripped up by the Packers. I think Jordan Addison is a great play moving forward. And then Jauan Jennings here. You know, my thing with Jauan Jennings is that, again, we've had the unfortunate circumstance over the two of the last 3 weeks, which is that they've played in bad weather games. One thing's become clear: Brock Purdy can't play in those bad weather games. He simply cannot. And you can't trust him to play in those bad weather games. But when they get good weather, which is what they will have in Miami this week, you want to play Jauan Jennings. So I'm not saying to bench Jauan Jennings. I'm just saying always make sure to watch what the weather looks like, because it doesn't look like Brock Purdy can throw in that kind of condition. But one thing's for sure, Jauan Jennings is and will continue to be this number one wide receiver for San Francisco moving forward this year. Tyreek Hill at 16 and Cooper Kupp at 17 to round out this tier. Listen, Tyreek Hill takes a step back, goes back to being a questionable, benchable guy. Like, a lot of times, again, I'm not going to tell you guys to bench Tyreek Hill. But again, I moved him from high-end flex category to must-start territory after week 14. Now he's back in high-end flex. There's still that shred of doubt versus the San Francisco 49ers that he doesn't do well, because he didn't do well against the Houston Texans. Now, that's a tough matchup. The 49ers aren't as tough. But Tyreek Hill just is the same story he's been all year. He's been very, very sluggish, and he just doesn't look like the same guy. Injury definitely factors into it, but again, that's all the reasons why I don't think he's a must start this week. Cooper Kupp at 17 at the New York Jets. The matchup's fantastic. Ultimately, it comes down to, is he going to get the ball? He goose egg for everybody, and obviously, it's really ugly to play her player off a goose egg. The one thing I'll tell you is this. Jaden Reed, nobody wanted to play him after week 14. Ends up coming out having a pretty solid game in a full PPR format in week 15. Like, you can't roll over a goose egg into the next week for a player who's usually important to the offense, and Cooper Kupp is. So ultimately, he's still inside the top 20 for me, but I definitely put him down here a little bit because some weeks his importance does vary, and it's just becoming less and less frequent and consistent that he is a very high-end target for the Los Angeles Rams. Dropping down to our next tier. Brian Thomas Jr. at 18 and Courtland Sutton at 19. Now, Brian Thomas Jr., in many people's eyes, this may feel too low. And I'm honestly curious to watch comments about this one because, again, I really do think people will think this low. At Las Vegas this week, the matchup couldn't be much better. Brian Thomas Jr., what I said on what I got right and wrong, and I addressed that I got this one wrong. What still concerns me is Mac Jones, and I get it, he looked much better than I gave him credit for. But I've seen this guy collapse and just go into a hole because he's just not particularly mentally tough. I don't care if that's controversial or not. He's not the most mentally tough guy. So I don't know if exactly this is the best matchup to bet against Mac Jones in, but I just don't have tons of confidence in Mac Jones still. And that's why Brian Thomas is a little lower. But I will say this. I would play him over a lot of wide receiver 2 options that you probably would typically go ahead and play. Somebody like a Garrett Wilson who's down here in this tier, we'll get to him in a little bit. I play Brian Thomas over him. Courtland Sutton at 19 at the Los Angeles Chargers. The matchup is obviously more beatable than I thought it was based on the way Mike Evans just ripped up those boys. Now, obviously, this is a divisional matchup, so it's just a lot more at stake and a lot more uncertainty in this matchup. But Courtland Sutton remains the number one. He got in the end zone last week. It saved his week particularly, but if you just look at him over the past 2 months, he's been really dominant. He's going to continue to get at least 7 targets per game, and based on the way Bo has been playing for the majority of the last 2 months, I want to take Courtland Sutton a lot of the time. Ladd McConkey at 20 and Garrett Wilson at 21. Ladd McConkey versus Denver. Obviously, we have a permanent question tag on this guy's forehead. He just have it tattooed on his forehead, essentially. Because Ladd McConkey, every time he catches the ball, the guy winces and just like grimaces in pain. And even after he caught the touchdown in week 15, I was like, is this guy getting up? Like, honestly, he just looks like he's playing miserably hurt right now. And they really just need him because he's their best playmaker by far. So I'm sure they're probably giving him under-the-table bonuses just to play the actual games. Versus Denver this week, the matchup is definitely more beatable than it once was. Ladd McConkey is super important to this offense and really efficient with Justin Herbert. He's definitely, if he plays, a top 20 guy. And Garrett Wilson, top 21. Versus the Rams, nothing wrong with the matchup. Guys, you take that one big play out for Garrett Wilson, it was a bad week. Like, this has been my problem with Garrett Wilson, is his lower floor. And again, that was not a 4 game he just hit. It would have been a 4 game if he didn't get that touchdown. But Garrett Wilson, over the last, month, this guy is definitely taken the backseat to Davante Adams. He's no longer the wide receiver 1 there. It's Davante Adams. And Garrett Wilson definitely still has upside, but he definitely does not have a safe floor. So I definitely don't particularly love, placing a lot of capital on this guy as far as who I'm going to start him over. I just don't really trust Garrett Wilson at this point. I think his floor is really low still, and his ceiling is definitely still super high. Dropping down to our next tier. Drake London and Darnell Mooney. They are still the same. Even though Darnell Mooney did nothing basically on Monday night versus the Las Vegas Raiders and Drake London got the touchdown, the same problem still remains. Kirk Cousins sucks, and they're still going to use him. He's still their freaking quarterback. Makes no logical sense to anybody who's watching this team. They should definitely go to Michael Penix just to try to get a spark. But they're continuing to ride it with Kirk Cousins, and it makes no sense. And that keeps these guys down here as low-end wide receiver 2s to me. Because realistically, I can't trust these guys even if they're playing the New York Giants. They barely produced. Drake London barely produced versus the Las Vegas Raiders. So against another bad team, yeah, I'm sure they'll win the game. But how much are they really going to be contributing? I don't know. I don't trust either of their floor, and I really don't think London and Mooney have particularly super high upside like a Garrett Wilson does, for example, in the tier above them. DJ Moore at 24 and Malik Neighbors at 25. So with DJ Moore, he plays the Detroit Lions this week. And listen, with DJ Moore, this is something I also discussed earlier as well, which is that DJ Moore, it does really look like to me that the Bears have essentially just declared themselves done and ready for a vacation. And they look disinterested. Caleb looks disinterested. These receivers look disinterested. Versus Detroit, it's a smothering matchup right here. I ultimately just don't have tons of faith anymore in DJ Moore hitting upside games. I actually think his floor is kind of stabled out to a relatively good place, but I don't think he's going to hit a ceiling game. And I feel the same about Malik Neighbors, even against a strong matchup in Atlanta. Look, he actually did score, and he actually did produce a really good game in fantasy again. But again, there's more quarterback uncertainty. Tommy Cutlets went down with a concussion in that game. Now they're rolling out and even another unknown at quarterback. Like, this team can't catch a break, man. So I just don't really have tons of trust in Malik Neighbors at this point. I'm sorry, guys. I hate to tell you. But Malik Neighbors, I just can't trust his quarterback situation, even against a great matchup. Let it be known, upside is super high, but his floor is definitely like what it's been, which is like 6 to 8 points. Dropping down to our last tier right here. DK Metcalf at 26 and Zay Flowers at 27. It's time to address reality of both these guys. They're not hitting ceiling games. And I don't know what the deal is with Zay in particular, but I'll start out with DK. DK Metcalf plays the Vikings. Again, I don't have a problem with the matchup or anything like that. But I do have a problem with what the potential quarterback situation is. As I went over, we'll have to monitor this one. This is his Geno Smith ranking right here, because it just hasn't been working. And, maybe he's like fine with taking a backseat to JSN. I saw comments earlier in the week discussing how he's really proud of Jack Smith-Njigba becoming this guy that he's become. But like DK Metcalf, ultimately, when it comes down to his fantasy upside, it's not really there. I mean, it's just floor at this point, which is safe. But I think at this point, we can't really rely on much else. And with Zay Flowers here versus Pittsburgh, the first game he got in the end zone, but that was basically a week-saving touchdown. He hasn't hit an upside game in a long time. This guy, week to week, is obviously capable of winning you a week, but he's also capable of doing next to nothing. So Zay Flowers, I just don't have tons of trust in at this point. Can he absolutely do it? Of course he can. But will he do it? I don't really have a ton of faith at this point. The guy's on a bad streak, and sometime that streak will snap, but I don't know if it's going to be before the NFL playoffs. And that won't help you for your fantasy playoffs. Khalil Shakir at 28 versus New England right here. It's time to address, it's clearly him that has become the most valuable wide receiver in fantasy in Buffalo. He's the target guy for Josh Allen, and Josh Allen's playing out of his mind right now. The only concern I really have for this game is that they'll crush the Patriots. So, how much will they really need to throw, into the second half? They're going to crush the Patriots, man. So, I don't know if they're going to need to throw very much. So, Khalil Shakir, to me, I think he's got, plenty of upside and a pretty stable floor. But ultimately, if they don't need to throw too much in the second half, how can he really come away with more than 6 targets in this game? That's why I've got him down here at 28. And to round it all out, Jameson Williams at 29 and Devonta Smith at 30. With Jameson Williams, he's obviously become, honestly, a really stable floor play because his role has expanded to more than just a big play threat. Versus Chicago this week doesn't matter. The role that he's really taken on is that he's become a solid number 2 option in this offense as a wide receiver. It's not just big plays anymore. He can hit it, and he did in week 15. But at the same time, he can easily do it again against anybody, and he still is going to get, 6 catches for 65 yards. It's become pretty safe at this point, but it really does determine whether or not he hits the big play, whether or not he's going to finish as a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 hybrid, or a wide receiver 1. And Devonta Smith at 30 obviously has the big bounce back week against the Pittsburgh Steelers, against the Commanders again. Again, it's the same concern I have with A.J. Brown, which is that in this week, are they going to do it a second straight week where they try to appease both these guys? I have some reservations about it, but I do think they're obviously both high upside. The matchup is awesome. There's no question that the matchup is great, but ultimately it just comes down to a belief that I don't know if they're going to continue to do this again. I think Saquon Barkley might get back into the end zone this week and just kind of dominate this game. So let me know how your lineup is starting to look this week, and stay tuned this afternoon for the updated Week 16 defense rankings.